Did you like this Spider-Man?
I loved it. I freaking loved it.
Oh, it was terrible. It was horrible.
This episode is sponsored by Hired.com. Are you searching for a new job? That can be stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles you don't actually want, and the job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. And sometimes you go all the way through the interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary, offer, or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. We make your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with compelling new opportunities. After completing one simple application, top employers apply to hire you. And on Hired, you will receive personal interview requests and upfront salary information so you can make informed decisions about what opportunities to pursue over a condensed timeline. Hired offers access to more than 4,000 innovative employers, including big brand names like Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. And we help you find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Open to relocation? Let them know. Your privacy and autonomy in your job search is of utmost importance. And if you go check them out at the show's link, that's hired.com/adventures in Angular, you can get double their normal hiring bonus. So instead of $300, you get $600 for signing up at our link. That's hired.com/adventures in Angular. Hey everybody, and welcome to another Adventures in Angular show. This week on our panel we have Ward Bell.
Hello.
Alyssa Nicoll.
Hey.
Joe Eames.
Hey everybody.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, Mike Hartington.
Hello.
Mike, you're not on every week, so I thought you might want to just take a minute and tell people who you are.
Sure. I am a developer advocate for the Ionic framework. Basically, if you've ever used Ionic before, you probably have seen my picture somewhere up online. But I just try to help people succeed and do as well as they can on mobile.
Awesome. And we also have you as a speaker at Angular Dev Summit. So I'm just going to call that out. You're going to be doing some kind of demo with Ionic.
Yeah, I'm going to be showing some of the cool stuff we've been working on and all the fun new stuff coming up.
Nice. Do you want to talk for a minute about what some of that cool new stuff is, or what you've been working on lately?
Sure. So recently, inside of Ionic, we've been going through this investigative phase where we're looking into moving things into a more vanilla JavaScript kind of state. So moving things to a web component-based architecture.
Web component-based architecture. What do you mean by that? So
something that we noticed a lot throughout all the different frameworks, Angular has components, React has components, Preact and has components as well. Even frameworks like Ember, they have components. So all these different frameworks and libraries out there all have this similar concept of, what this reusable thing is. Like, here's a bit of functionality. Here's like a custom element that we can ship, and it's inside of a particular framework's API. And that kind of becomes limiting because you build something in Angular, well, you can't get it to work in, say, Preact or even Vue just because the API compatibility isn't there. So we're looking to see...
We've never heard of those two words you just said.
all of these awesome, other frameworks that are equally as fun as Angular.
Blasphemy.
We love Angular still, but we want to see, can you make something that not only works inside of Angular, but also all these other frameworks out there, and also outside of a framework? Well, you're going to have to tune into the Angular Dev Summit conference to find out.
So one other thing I just want to clarify here. When you're talking about web components, you're not talking about the standard that Google's working on Polymer to clarify things around. You're talking about just the idea of components?
No, we're actually talking about the web standard itself.
Okay.
So it touches on a good point, because one of the things that we constantly hear is that, web components, you mean something like Polymer, which is, fair, because that's been one of the driving forces behind it. But Polymer is only one implementation of web components. They provide the polyfills to make sure everything works, but it's all in runtime. So something we have been pretty interested in is creating web components all at a build time. So that way, when it actually renders out, it's just static JavaScript at that point.
So I'm just curious then, what does it mean for us Angular folks who are pretty used to the way that Ionic just works with Angular?
Sure. So if you're using Angular and Ionic right now, when we start implementing some of these, this experiments in future releases, nothing really should change for you. A lot of it comes down to the possibility for using Ionic's components elsewhere. So if you're using Ionic and Ionic Angular, everything pretty much stays the same. You get a little bit of a smaller payload size because of how we're creating the components. But if you want to say use something like Ionic's components without any framework, maybe you're just making a simple form online and you want to have some, a little bit of nice UI and not have a whole framework to load that page up, to load just that single form. You can start sprinkling some of these components in just using the standard APIs without any framework.
So essentially, our current as Angular developers, our current interaction with Angular we'll actually be interacting with an adapter, which is actually an adapter around where the functionality actually is, which is inside a web component. Something like that. Should that be our mental model?
More or less. So we're working on the wrappers to make sure that everything kind of works. The way it would end up being is we'd have a single Ionic Angular package. Once that gets installed via NPM, everything that it needs to have the web components talk to Angular would already be included as soon as you bootstrap the entire app.
Right. But as I suddenly put on and become a React developer, then I'm able to go get those same user experience and all that other stuff, because there'll be some way of interacting with, again, perhaps a React type adapter around again, those same web components, so that I would be able to go that way if that was my preference. Is that kind of the vision?
Yeah, that's kind of the vision. And it's something that, may not be obvious, but that was kind of the idea when we first started Ionic. Way back in our commit history log, you would see the directory structure actually having vanilla JavaScript and then Angular specific directives, or AngularJS specific directives and controllers. And then we had originally planned to do something with showing its age backbone and then knockout.
Right.
And even Ember, because Ember is still pretty popular, but it ended up just falling kind of to the side when we saw how productive we could be with Angular and how little of a API that is shared between all of those different frameworks. Fast forward to today, it's a much different story. Everyone's kind of converged around the same idea that components are a good thing. This is how we should be building apps. And so all the standards kind of just happen to align that components are, web components are basically shipping everywhere, even on, Safari and iOS. All the frameworks kind of have the same mental model of you build up your component and your entire app is just this tree of components. So it's easier to implement and it just makes more sense.
No, it makes sense to me. And of course, if, putting my business model hat, it makes a heck of a lot more sense for somebody who's trying to create a suite of controls, visual controls, to be able to play it all.
Do you think though that it's limiting us, as developers and our creativity? Because it's kind of it's almost like saying, here are the only building blocks you're ever going to need, and then we never try to invent anything else to solve the problems. I don't know. Does it feel like that to anybody else? Is that just me?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, because I was just looking through the components, and I'm just wondering, I don't know, is it just an ever-expanding list that they're building? Or, sorry, am I still not making sense to you guys?
You're raising an interesting question, Alyssa, which is to the degree that somebody creates a catalog or an inventory of, I'm going to call them widgets, just for lack of a better word. To what degree is that constraining our creativity? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, because I'm just reading through the components list, right? And I've got like list, loading, menus, modals, navigation, pop over, radio. And like, if you keep going, and you have this list and you provide that and we're using Ionic, then does that mean that, like, I don't know, we're just breeding future developers to just not think out of the box and like only use, you know what I mean? Like, I get that, like, from all of like our historical like years of experience online, we see like that these things have been working, or people expect, this behavior from these kind of elements. But I don't know. Some part of me is like, is there a way with Ionic perhaps to build custom components that your company needs or something, like, or is it just here's the list?
That makes sense. So the APIs that we're using to generate all these components, it's super easy to just, dive in below that and have access to like the raw web component stuff. So maybe you wanted to modify, how the radio toggle works, or maybe you just wanted to create something new and use the tools that we've created. Yeah, it's totally possible to just utilize that and have something a little bit more custom tailored to, your needs. Okay.
So that's good to know, because that was my first thought, was like, but what about the creative fun? So, but yeah,
no, we want to make sure that people who just need to get up and running and have a good set of tools can do just that. But for the people who want some of the more fine-grained control, we want to make sure that that's available to them as well.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I like the idea. I mean, this is one of the things that is always trying to be balanced, right? Is it simple enough for somebody to pick up quickly, but yet have enough other options out there so that if people need to go deep and do something, I guess more advanced or trickier or, outside of the box, can we do that too? And it sounds like the answer is yes.
Yeah, which is
pretty
great.
Much.
That's awesome.
One other thing that I'm wondering, and you can answer this, I think, pretty quickly, but I know that web components are at least supposed to be rather performant, but at the same time, you're talking about having a lot of this stuff built on web components as sort of another library, and I think, Ward, you'd use the word adapter. So if I have something that adapts to something else that now runs Ionic, is that going to impact performance?
In general, it shouldn't. What the end goal is that the code that is needed to run the web component would just be vanilla JavaScript. So it wouldn't be any heavier than any custom Angular component or any other code that you would write for your app. And it would run outside of a framework. So the context that these would be APIs that are built into the browser. So generally, you would expect them to be able to run a little bit, more faster because they're just default APIs. So the shim layer that we're thinking about would be, as small as possible and just really set up so that way you could pass properties as inputs. You could set up your event system using Angular's outputs. It would just allow for that extra layer to make sure that everything that Angular can do and it can send to a component and that component can emit out would still work with a web component.
As I'm playing this in my head, an Angular component carries with it a lot of other capabilities that probably aren't relevant to a UI element. For example, all of its support for DI, all of its support for doing sort of component tree walking and projections and all that stuff, which is really important as you're building up layers of an application, component trees, and trying to weave services in and out. But that, if I'm a designer of a radio button, I don't need all that overhead, right?
Exactly.
And so, and Ionic is, I'm looking at your inventory here, and I'm not injecting a service into an alert or in a radio, or a button or something necessarily. And I'm not doing any kinds of complex transformations of exterior templates into those, and so all of which is really useful for building application components, but not for here. So I would, so I can see where you're going there, that the efficiency and simplicity of a web component implementation frees you from having to carry the payload of a completely general application component framework such as Angular provides.
Right.
Is that where you're going?
Generally, that's pretty close to on point. At your building time, like if you're building an app and you have the web component versions of all the Ionic stuff, you'll eventually get some of the additional APIs that Angular's app component offers. Things working with change detection, content projection, and all the lifecycle hooks that come with it. But that makes sense for the application development, not for the controls. Right.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. And so you can free yourself, as a vendor of a particular kind of component with certain set of responsibilities, you can be free of all of the generalities that are both creative for us as application developers, but also burden the component in a general framework like an Angular and an Ember and all those others.
Correct.
Does that answer your question, Chuck? Does that sort of fit it?
Mm-hmm. The other question that I wanted to ask, though, is that I know that people have used Ionic not just to build mobile apps, but also to build progressive web apps. And so I'm wondering, does this translate all the way up to desktop browsers?
Yeah, definitely. So it becomes even more useful to start utilizing some of these web components in a progressive web app context, because of the nature of web components being less code generally and more using the browser's own APIs. Loading can end up becoming a lot faster. Your overall payload for each chunk ends if you're doing lazy loading, ends up being much smaller. So generally, the smaller progressive web, the smaller kind of limited network area users can take advantage of all that, and it would translate, being even faster if you were to do something, say, like a large desktop application.
One thing that's not clear to me is, and you go to your homepage and it talks a little bit about native apps, but then we got this progressive web app thing, and I'm really lost about the boundaries there and where Ionic wants to play.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
So where do we want to play between progressive web apps and hybrid native apps?
Yeah, I mean, what are we looking at there? Is there a direction, tendency? How should we understand our choices there?
So we understand that, hybrid technologies such as PhoneGap or Cordova are going to be around because some people prefer native applications, going the distribution model of going through an app store. But at the same time, there are people who just want to ship something, put it up on the web, and just have it accessible through a URL. So we want to try to cater to both parties and provide a kind of nice balanced offerings for each. And it kind of leads to one of the goals of these hybrid technologies like PhoneGap and Cordova is that at the end of it all, it should no longer be needed because the browser implements all the APIs that native devices have. And we're kind of seeing that trend, we're kind of seeing that, come to fruition with all the changes inside of, not only Chrome, but, things that Safari and all the other Microsoft Edge, all the other browser vendors are implementing. Do
you see a move away from the PhoneGap approach towards just pure, towards PWAs, or are you just saying we're standing back, we don't know how it's going to play? Or
well, we just released the numbers from a developer survey that we sent out, and while it seems to be a pretty healthy mix between people who only want to ship a native binary versus folks who are extremely interested in doing progressive web apps and not having to deal with the native level.
So is Ionic just to continue doing progressive web apps and kind of splitting the difference then?
I guess we'll continue pushing for the progressive web apps side of things, pushing for progressive web apps. If progressive web apps somehow seem to fall on their face and everyone starts abandoning them, we'll still have Cordova in the background. And then, if we want to ship like native desktop applications, we can start using things like Electron. So we have many options available to us.
Yeah, I don't have personal experience with the Cordova phone gap approach, but it was always, partly that's because I've always been afraid of it.
I mean, there's good reasons to be. It's, I love the approach and the ideas behind it. But if you want to try to do something that's beyond what's out there, like if you want to create a new or use, say, a new API that's available, coming to iOS 11, there's like an augmented reality API. If you wanted to do something with Cordova, but there wasn't any APIs or plugins to help with that, you'd have to start writing some of the native code. And that's a really specialized task. So, I mean, it's understandable why people tend to shy away from it.
Well, you raised an interesting question. Suppose I was really hot on augmented reality. Mm-hmm. Is that something that Ionic is looking into, or do you have some vision about how one could write such an app that made use of Ionic controls?
I actually don't know. I know that we've seen a few people who have, inside of like a HoloLens, or what's the one that's by HTC?
Vive?
Yeah, the Vive, some kind of headset that you can start using augmented reality stuff, or VR and augmented reality. People have been able to load the browser in there and use Ionic's controls. And generally, it just works because it's all web technology.
I think that's a really cool frontier. I'm not sure that everybody who's listening knows what augmented reality is. How would one say that in an elevator pitch?
If you want to put a web app on your couch, you can do that.
Right.
I guess that would be the easiest way I could think of explaining it.
Yeah, it's like having a psychotic episode in which you're hallucinating things over the couch and the walls.
Have you ever seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
Yeah, something like that. It's like you drop some really good psychotropic. Except it's used,
taking it somewhere,
and then use it to perform surgery on someone. See, that's the turn right there.
Yeah. Have any of you used augmented reality, HoloLens, or anything else?
I've tried it.
I've tried the Daydream, which has been pretty interesting. I
got to try HoloLens a couple of years ago, and it was really exciting, I have to say.
Yeah, I used HoloLens at Microsoft Build this year, and it's really come a long way. I think they're selling or announcing HoloLens kits that you can buy here in September. But anyway, what's really interesting is it's not just you see something on your couch or you see something in the room with you that isn't physically there, but it's also the ways that you can interact. So you focus on a particular point or object, and then it calls up, some interaction or some level of operation that you can do. And what's really interesting about it to me is that so you walk into a room, maybe you have an IoT device or some other spatial setup that you do, because some of them it's just relative to where you set it up to be, and so you see things in the room, but then you can interact with them, and so it goes beyond just adding things to your reality, but it also becomes a way for you to look more closely at things and learn things and interact with things, without actually having to physically build something up, and in a 3D space, which is also really interesting. Don't wait for users to report problems. Raygun gives you complete visibility on errors, crashes, and performance problems affecting your end users. You can replicate issues in seconds rather than digging through log files and having to rely on users to report errors or crashes. Raygun gives you a window into how users are really experiencing your software applications. It has full support for JavaScript and all other major languages and platforms. It takes less than 10 minutes to set up, and you can get a free 14-day trial by going to raygun.com and signing up today.
And all the browsers are kind of coming along the idea that this should be an API available to work with, so we have like WebVR and WebAR. So kind of getting back to the Ionic side of things, like this is all going to be totally possible to do.
Right, because I'm looking at your list of of components and imagining how that might fit. What kinds of applications would I use? I'd still need date pickers and things like that. I'm just picking one out of the air. If I'm trying to, trying to integrate the reality with some kind of back-end system I have that is that would customarily be seen as a traditional, like say, inventory management app. I'm trying to imagine combining my inventory management app with my augmented reality as I'm walking through a warehouse kind of thing. And so I can see it. I can see why that would be an exciting opportunity for you guys.
Yeah, but one other thing that I see with this is going, well beyond that. So, let's say you have a Nest thermostat in your house. So you use augmented reality to look at the Nest thermostat, and then you just look at the turn it up or turn it down, or you focus on the temperature you want it to be, and all of a sudden your world reacts to the way that you used your AR.
Right. And you still need those affordances to be able to turn that thermostat up and down, and that's again where Ionic could play.
Yep. And just to kind of whet people's appetite a little bit, our guest next week scheduled is Alyssa Nicoll, and she's going to be talking to us about web VR and visualization. So if you're interested in this stuff, we're going to dig deep on it next week.
Nice.
So I think we hijacked the conversation a little bit, but it's
but it's a relevant part of the conversation on how Ionic fits into where things are going to go in the future.
Right. It's not just like throwing a date control on your screen and moving on.
Yeah.
It's like, what if you could actually touch the date control?
Yeah. Reach into the future and through the date picker.
Yep. Were there other aspects of this that we wanted to dig into? I know we usually try and keep this to half hour, and that's about where we're at.
I can't seem to think of anything.
Do you want to just give us the 2-minute intro to what you're going to be showing us at Angular Dev Summit?
So I'm going to be showing off Ionic components across a multitude of frameworks and how you can take advantage of the tooling and that we have created to create your own custom components that utilize that can work across any kind of framework that you want, and even without frameworks.
Awesome. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, let's go ahead and do some picks. Are you ready to master Angular? Oasis Digital offers Angular Bootcamp, a 3-day intense workshop class for individuals or teams. They cover Angular 4 and 2 and focus on the skills and knowledge you need for complex, data-rich applications. They also still offer AngularJS for teams supporting older projects. Bring them to your site or send developers to them in St. Louis, San Francisco, New York, DC, and other cities, and online at angularbootcamp.com. Alyssa, do you want to start us off with picks?
Well, sure. I guess my pick is kind of boring this week, but it's what I've been doing with my life lately. So you guys know of like the app called Sketch?
I've heard of it.
Maybe not. It's like a Photoshop replacement, except for it's like more for like SVG type dealios. So I've been doing a lot of comp work lately for my company and like UI UX stuff. And there's like, I got like so good at the hotkeys that I'm like creating the comp with nothing but like the keyboard. And I'm just like, yes, I am God of Sketch. So yeah, so I'm loving that app lately. So if you are a designer or front-end dev who needs to do design work, check it out.
Awesome. Joe, do you want to give us some picks?
Yes, sir. I'd love to. So I just saw the movie Dunkirk, just this last weekend. Oh my gosh!
Oh, you liked it?
Oh, I loved it.
It was so
You didn't like it?
Oh,
so boring. You guys are terrible.
Disappointing.
I was sitting through this one scene and like, okay, so my
Which
husband,
scene?
me and him are we walked out of the theater and I go, did you like it? And he goes, well, for a movie without any words, it was pretty good. Like, and that is so true, right? And there's so many scenes where like, it's just the sky and a plane and it's silent and there's epic
Movies
music.
don't have to have wars to be great war movies.
Okay, maybe I'm just not a war movie genre person. So if you are, you should listen to Joe.
I see that I have been liberated at last from the Star Wars curse. We're going to just keep wailing on Alyssa now on Dunkirk from now on.
Did you like Dunkirk, Ford?
I haven't seen it. I was actually afraid to see it because it's gotten really terrific reviews, but it looks like a long slog through death and gore. And and the reality of war, and it seems so probably faithful to it. And I'm afraid of that.
Like, because I can't do gore. Like, I just cannot. That's when I bow out. So, like, in the Saw movie, like, that was me walking out of the movie theater. So it's nothing like that, but it is very sobering. Like, there were a lot of moments where you're like, dang. Like, so.
I've heard,
like
I've heard
another-
really good things.
What you want, Alyssa, is a Hollywood war movie. You want planes exploding. You want the Death Star shooting down on the planet. TIE
Okay,
fighters pulling over. That's what you want, which I get. I love that.
Right. And it's not realistic. I get that. Because, like, I'm a Marvel girl at heart. So, of course, whenever there's anything other than explosions every 5 seconds, it's not awesome. So, but no,
So,
I like Ward. I've heard that it was a good war movie for war movies.
Here's what I loved about it. One, it wasn't like the typical. In fact, I'm trying to think through. Was there like a line in the movie that's one of those? The cameras are on. Who's the guy that does Michael Bay. The wind's blowing in their hair. There's explosions in the background, and he rips off his sunglasses and says, "Looks like it's time to kick some ass." That's what you want. I don't.
Okay.
Which is fine.
At which point a
Sign me
Corvette
up.
rolls up and turns into a robot. Yeah.
Yes. Right.
So to be totally horrible, there was a moment like that, but there just was no words, right? Like, that's what it was. Like the captain, he's standing there at the end of the dock and he's like, I'm waiting for the French. And then they keep sailing away and he's just standing there like saluting them. And you're just like, that was the Michael Bay moment. So
that was the Michael Bay moment. So I like the fact that, the slow pace was like, it was almost just so tense. There was some very interesting filmmaking. For one thing, did you notice you never once saw the face of an enemy? Not a single time in the show. Like, they're in the planes and they're shooting at people. You see they're shooting, but you never see who's shooting. In fact, I'm not even sure if they once said the word German. I'm not 100% positive. It was so. It was like
didn't.
It was about the people. Right? It was about the soldiers trying to survive. And I think somewhat true to form with the actual event of Dunkirk. The actual event of Dunkirk took place over like 12 days. It wasn't this constant, like, we're, in a nonstop firefight for 12 solid days, right? There was lots of lulls in that and just people sitting around waiting, wondering if they're ever going to get home. I thought it was almost a lot more realistic than you see in a lot of, and authentic maybe. I like that. It's not to say I actually don't. I like some Michael Bay movies, and I love Private Ryan, for example. But I don't know. I thought it was unique, and I thought the cinematography, and I think that he did some very unique stuff. That how it goes back and forth in time was sometimes a little hard for me to follow.
Oh yeah.
Critics love that. So
I don't know. Maybe
they love like weaving timelines.
Yeah,
That's
so I liked it. I really thought it was great and a very interesting story about a very interesting part of World War II. So I highly recommend that you go see it if you're anybody whose last name is not Nicoll. So there we go. Wow, that was a long pick.
I know. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I'm going to let Ward do some picks, and then I'm going to be like, you like that? Go ahead,
All
Ward.
right.
What are your picks?
Well, I just got back from e-biking through Switzerland, which I cannot recommend highly enough.
Wait,
e-biking, is that like vaping?
So like VR, you had a VR helmet on
Exactly.
and you set on
that's right.
stationary bike at home.
Exactly. You don't even do that. You sit in your couch and Switzerland make Switzerland come to you.
I like it. I'm all for it.
And then you reach out for a beer and you're done. Or it could have been the way it actually happened, which is you fly there and you ride a bike for 11 days across 400 miles of the most glorious countryside.
No, wait,
I
you
can
can
ever
ride
see.
a bike. This is like it's a powered bike.
Yeah.
No.
My butt hurts just thinking about it.
I don't want to talk about your butt just yet, Chuck. Anyway, I will have more to say on this in future shows. But therefore, I'm plucking from that amazing trip a new guilty pleasure, which is a dish called Rusty, R-O with an umlaut S-T-I, which must have bacon on it to appeal to Joe and to me. and I don't know what else, and has fried egg, and I'm putting a recipe in for it in the show notes. But it's really like potato, like giant hash brown with all this goodness on top of it. You gotta make yourself some
Like,
roast.
can we get all the ingredients here, or is this like some magical thing that nobody's ever going to be able to make?
I put it in the show notes. I'm putting a Bon Appetit recipe for roasty with bacon and scallion. But it is a traditional Swiss farm dish that will require you to go burn a lot of calories to get it off. But it hits you, you look at it and you say, I shouldn't eat this. Like so many great things. You look at it and you say, I really shouldn't eat this. And then I do. That's my pick.
Nice.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you needed
like
the carbs and energy like on this trip. So
not really, but yes.
Awesome.
All right, I'm going to throw out some picks here. So this morning I picked up a book, and I've read The Millionaire Next Door by T. Harv Eker, but I didn't realize that he also had The Millionaire Mind, which is another book that talks about how millionaires approach things and think about things. And it's been really, really enlightening. I've really been enjoying the book.
Is the short version, they think, can I buy this? Yes, I can. Is that it?
Yeah, let's hear the short version. Yeah.
So
I'm rich. I could buy this.
It's a book about mindset, and it's a book about, how you think about different problems and think about money and about the things that you buy.
When you have money.
No, it also comes down to how you run your business and how you manage your finances and the way that people thought about things before they were millionaires. And it's really, really fascinating just to dig into, okay, so these are the limiting beliefs that I have that are keeping me from becoming wealthy. And these are the behaviors that I've learned that I need to unlearn in order to, achieve my financial goals. And it's really, really interesting just to look at and go, oh, I learned that from my parents, and it's not a healthy outlook on things. Or I'm glad I learned this from my parents because it is a healthy outlook on things. So anyway, highly recommend it.
So I've heard of these books, and one thing I always want to know is there's this thing called the survivor effect, I think. Is anybody familiar with the concept I'm talking about?
I'm liking where you're going.
Survivorship bias.
Yeah, survivorship bias. There we go. Do these books address and say, this book deals with this is valid because I have dealt with and analyzed the effect of survivorship bias, and considering that this is still a valid book? Or is this, because if you just simply, for those who don't know, survivorship bias is the problem in studies where you say, well, who's the winners? And you look at the winners and look at things they have in common with themselves. And what you don't consider is all the people or whatever that had that same trait that didn't survive and didn't make it. And so therefore it actually, what they pull out as a commonality turns out not to be any, it has no causation on the success of the thing. So, example, a certain mindset on being rich, you might have a million people with that same mindset. It just so happens that the people that are rich also have that same mindset, but having that same mindset doesn't necessarily do anything to get you there, right? Like being born into a wealthy family is definitely one of those things that does matter. So I was just curious if he talks about that at all.
The whole thing of correlation is not causation,
right?
Just because lots of millionaires think that blue is the best color in the world doesn't mean that if you don't think that, you won't become a millionaire. Kind of thing. Yeah.
So is he addressed that at all in this book? Because I'd hate to waste time and money on books that really have.
So I'm not all the way through the book. I will point that out. He has addressed some of it in some of the parts of it that, the first half of it or so that I've read. But yeah, he also, for both this and his other book, interviewed a whole bunch of millionaires and just talked to them about a lot of it is mindset, but a lot of it is also, the behaviors that come out of that mindset that actually saved or made them the money. And he talks about different people who changed their mindset and then were able to make more. Or in some cases, they were people who were making a lot of money and then changed their mindset to make even more money, and just addresses a lot of those limiting beliefs and just realizing that, thinking too small was what was hurting them. And in other cases, it was other things, other ways that you look at money or think about rich people or things like that held people up. And once they got rid of those beliefs, then they were able to move forward. So I think there's some of it. I don't know if you can directly, completely address that, though. So I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer to that question. But yeah, we'll leave it at that. If people have feedback on that, leave a comment on the show notes, and it'll be interesting to see if we have a conversation about that.
Can I kick in another pick then?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it just reminded me of something. There's this book I've been reading. I'm going to pull up the name of it here so that we have the name. It's called Everybody Lies: Big Data, New Data, and What the Internet Can Tell Us About Who We Really Are. Okay. So it's a book about big data specifically, but it's about finding out about sociology and psychology and stuff using big data. Mostly the data sets that the guy uses are Google searches. To some smaller extent, he uses other data. He talks about other data sets for sure, but he talks about Google searches a lot. He wrote his PhD thesis on Google Trends and the data from Google Trends. And so what's interesting about this is he talks at the very beginning a lot about the fact that so much of psychology relies on what people say, and they lie so much, either knowingly or unknowingly, when they say things like, for example, he talks about the election, the Trump-Clinton election, and how what part of the thing that they do is they measure when they ask somebody who they're going to vote for, then they try to ask them how likely they actually are going to vote, right? And those numbers are so skewed. So many more people say they will vote than actually do go and vote, right? And so he actually talks about that there's these Google trends that they found in areas where there was high turnouts of votes, that these particular types of searches showed up, right? And he even talks about using Google Trends to try to determine who might be the more likely candidate to win the election, and ways to do that. It's pretty interesting. So, and he talks specifically a lot about things that normally couldn't be proven, like, for example, going back to your thing about the book, like in order to prove against survivorship bias, you might have to all right, these are the mindsets we found in common. Let's now go interview 1 million people and see how many of them have had that mindset and how long they've had. And that would be really difficult to actually go through it and do and prove, and potentially impossible. But he talks about certain scenarios that they thought could never be proven, and using big data and Google searches, you could actually potentially prove some of these things. It's very interesting, but highly recommend it. Totally find it fascinating, especially from a computer science standpoint. So sorry to take the last. Normally you get it, Chuck. Today it's mine.
No, it's all good.
Well, I'm throwing one. I'm throwing another one in to go on, to piggyback your counterpoint.
One-upmanship.
Which is, I saw a movie on the plane called The Founder, which is about Ray Kroc and how he aced out the McDonald's brothers. Talk about and it explores the very question of this mindset. Anyway, and it's highly entertaining, and it's a subject that I.
Yeah, I did see that movie.
What did you think? You thought it was good?
I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was really eye-opening.
I thought it was a little cutthroat, but I liked it.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, let's let Mike get some picks in.
No, he's out of time.
All right. So I recently just bought a house, and now I'm dealing with oh my God, I have to maintain a home and not have a landlord fix everything. So I've been looking up all of these random, non-programming, how to actually handle maintaining a house. What do I do if, I need if I have a leak inside of a bathtub? So I found this site, DIYNills.com, and it comes with all these awesome little projects. One of them is, perfect example, if you have a leak at a bathtub or something, here's how to seal it properly, how to properly put up Christmas lights, or how to create your own, HD projector screen for, an awesome basement if you, want to create an 80-inch TV screen. But one of the things that it does have that I think is pretty awesome is a kind of farm style kitchen table. So I'm going to be building this for the new home because I think it's freaking awesome, and it looks so cool once you actually see it.
Mike, have you seen The Money Pit?
Yes. Yes, I have.
For any new homeowner.
It's yeah. I've been warned about the trials and tribulations of owning a home and all the fun things that come along with it. Other than that, definitely go see Spider-Man Homecoming because it was so good.
That was good.
Wait, there's a good Spider-Man movie?
They finally did it. I mean, other than the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man, which everyone knows will always be the best pre-Marvel Spider-Man.
Hey, Alyssa, did you like this Spider-Man?
I loved it. I freaking loved it.
Oh, it was terrible. It was horrible.
Who are you? I used to think we were like twins.
I was so disappointed by this Spider-Man movie. I'm so sorry.
All right, I'm going to push us out.
I'm sorry, Mike.
I'm going to end the show, guys.
No,
I'm so heartbroken.
I haven't seen this one yet either. So now what am I going to do?
I was very disappointed by it. Go see Dunkirk. Don't go see Spider-Man.
See, it was either between Dunkirk or Spider-Man, so I went with Spider-Man.
I want to see
go see Dunkirk and not Spider-Man unless you have a girl with you, right? Like, there you go.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. We'll catch everyone next week. Thanks for coming, Mike.
Thanks.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.